Hi there. The title in this video, I allowed myself to be a little cheeky. 75 minutes, and you'll be strapped in. And you probably expect me to throw pathetic formulations on serious topics in this video. Something like, if you don't buckle up, then you don't deserve to be called a motorist. No, this shit doesn't work. And it never worked. Let's remember what social advertising about car safety looks like in our country. Driver, fasten your life. Don't break the lifeline. You go with friends, fasten your seat belts. Any decent lady in belts looks great. Well, you get it. The fine is 500 rubles, or whatever it is, for an unbuttoned belt. And there are a few more sayings from the boys' field, that beautiful guys don't need tinting. Bullshit. I won't do anything like that today. I'm just going to tell you what I know myself. Without pathos, without morality, without complicated thoughts. And I'll make it interesting. And yes, these are Burr stories. And in the end, decide for yourself. You are free people. All I'm going to ask you is give me 75 minutes, during which you and I will find out how and under what circumstances did the first fatalities occur on public roads. And why were the first killers on the roads acquitted? Why couldn't cars that could carry several flips through the roof without damage save the people who were inside? Why the church opposed the research of scientists in the field of car safety? And how scientists naturally tried to kill themselves? And how did the dead save the living? How one person could turn the course of automotive history when all the leading automotive concerns have already lost faith in the idea of a safe car. What is the sacred meaning of the numbers 3, 0, 43, 625 for every motorist? And why is the first brand that comes to mind when the word safety is Volvo? Why did Chevrolet organize surveillance and listen to the phone calls of one person who had never been behind the wheel, but had a huge influence on the automotive world? And why the era of chic and magnificent American cars of the 50s and 60s will never happen again? Welcome to the new issue of Burr Stories. And as in previous issues, quite often we will talk about unpleasant things here. Therefore, in order for YouTube to skip this material, some scenes will be blocked. But in the attached comment, you will find absolutely all the uncensored videos, and in the description, you will find a list of all the sources that I used in the preparation of this material. And take something delicious. It will be interesting. Training. We have all heard the phrase that the car, this is a means of increased danger, and accordingly, increased responsibility. Like, you can push people on it, crash into others and so on. Well, you can't push like that. They'll put you in jail for it. But hypothetically, purely hypothetically, every driver has the opportunity to fly through a stop with grandmothers. And everyone seems to understand everything, but the car has already become such an ordinary means of transportation in our life that you hardly think about people flying over the hood when you get behind the wheel, or about the poles and trees on which the entire Mark Club hangs, or about the oncoming lane, from which a driver who was distracted by a text message can fly at you. A person gets used to everything. Already after 6 months or a year, the driver feels completely relaxed at the wheel and gets used to objects flying past him at high speed. It is understandable. If every time I got behind the wheel, I thought about how people are smeared in space and how I can fly into a stop, I wouldn't get behind the wheel. Most likely, while driving, you are thinking about being late for a meeting or chatting about work issues. And similarly, since we do not encounter serious accidents in ordinary life. Well, yes, there are statistics that it seems like an accident happens and people die. But we never correlate this to our personal experience. We feel safe behind the wheel, and this sense of security is also created thanks to the huge but unnoticeable efforts of automakers and states. And so let's dig into the details. Let's fast forward with you, according to tradition, to the beginning of the 20th century, in the USA and Great Britain. Colleagues, Greetings. From the trials. Engineer of the third category. Absolutely there would be a load still. I will explain everything to you today. The total length of roads at the time of 1900 and the first year in the USA was 1,200 kilometers. About like 2 roads from Moscow to St. Petersburg. Everything else, as in the rest of the world, is just a direction. And in the UK, things did not get any better. And there was not much need for smooth roads, because the car had not yet received proper distribution. And those 3 cars that had been sold by that time were rolling around big cities, and did not know how to accelerate at all. Let me remind you that the Ford Model T, which appeared in 1908, had a frenzied 20 horsepower, from almost a 3-liter 2 and 9-row 4 engine, and could accelerate downhill with a tailwind to 65 kilometers per hour. Run, and on average, cars at that time drove at a speed of about 20 kilometers per hour. And even with the complete absence of any security elements, the killer was quite difficult. Well, one person did it. In fact, the accident was invented by the French, but this is material for another video. We will talk about this case when we talk about France. And the first fatal accident occurred in the UK. The case when women turned out to be better than men in at least something. Meet Mary Ward. Writer, astronomer, microscopist, artist. She has written a lot of scientific papers and books, the most popular of which is this, The World of Miracles Revealed by a Microscope. But despite the fact that this man devoted his whole life to science, the world did not remember her as a scientist. Mary Ward is the first person, or rather a woman, to die in an accident. Success is feminine. The context is such that her nephews assembled a steam car in the garage and drove it around the neighborhood, taking Mary with them. Somehow, at one of the turns, she fell out and smeared under the wheels. In fact, a person spent the end of his life successfully testing the first model of a speed bump. It happened in 1869th year, when there was still no ice in the world, and the next high-profile case happened in the same way in Britain. In 1896, a certain Arthur Etzel, an employee of the Anglo-French Automobile Company, conducted tests of the novelty of this company. This is how Pepelac looked like, and he was flying through the streets of the city at an eerie speed, 13 kilometers per hour. As a test driver, the man had full driving skills. There was nothing to worry about at all. At the time of the accident, Arthur's driving experience numbered as much as 3 weeks. This person was unlucky on this day, Mrs. Driscoll. And as you can understand, the problem here was not only in the surname. The problem was that I smeared on the asphalt. Arthur at the wheel, well, or whatever the controls were called, was distracted by a conversation with a girl, and did not notice a pedestrian walking out onto the roadway. And Mrs. Driscoll, according to Oshasev, not noticing a car flying at her at a terrible speed of 13 kilometers per hour, at the last moment, tried to protect herself with an umbrella. The jury considered this case for 6 hours. There was no criminal case against either the driver or the company, as the jury decided that Driscoll was to blame herself. There are also signs about the possible appearance of a car over the roadway. The case when a minus is a plus. He'll give you a fuck. As a result of the meeting and the proceedings, her death was considered an accidental coincidence, and the coroner said that in no case should this ever happen again in the world. Yeah, aha, understood, accepted, recorded. Yes, agree. It sounds absolutely absurd in the modern world. And deaths at 13 kilometers per hour, and the way a person tried to protect himself with an umbrella, and the fact that everyone was acquitted in the end. But then people were just discovering cars, and simply did not understand how to behave in such situations. And in the United States, the first fatal accident occurred in 1899, at the intersection of 74th Street and Central Park West. The deceased's name was Henry Hale Neer, and he got off the tram and stopped to help his lady down. But the taxi car decided that the lady would come down by herself. At the same time, a doctor was traveling in this taxi, but it didn't help. Henry died in the hospital a few hours later. Unlike in Britain, the driver Arthur Smith was immediately taken into custody and charged with manslaughter. But he was acquitted in court. Guess why? Because he committed this murder unintentionally. The charge of manslaughter is acquitted because he committed this murder unintentionally. Logic. Fuck you bet. But the fact that people did not legally understand how to formalize all these cases is of little interest to us. The most important thing for us here is to understand that people began to die on the roads, and this quickly became a problem. In 1903, the number of cars produced in the world numbered 60,000 copies. In 1910, After only 7 years, this number exceeded 1 million, and in 2019, the number of cars in the world exceeded 1 billion. It's about as much as a lot of fucking cars, only 999 million more. And naturally, with the increase in the number of cars, the number of deaths on the roads also increased. Here are the official statistics of the United States on road accidents. We are interested in the highway fatalities column here. In Russian it is mortality. And we can see with you the explosive growth from 1910 to 1930. This is exactly the era of the Ford Model T, when the car became available to large masses, and when it began to appear on public roads and become commonplace in people's lives. 31,000 deaths in 1930 are almost 100 people every day. And since people didn't understand what to do with it, there was a lot of fun cringe. For example, a cool person in Britain says that the speed should be limited everywhere to 20 kilometers per hour. Then people will stop dying. But at the same time, the presence of deaths at 15 kilometers per hour somehow did not bother anyone. Here women make a human chain of themselves, blocking the road so that their children can go to school safely. But somehow, the opportunity to ride wholesale on the hood did not bother anyone. Women, maternal instinct, and logic, the perfect mix. But the most important thing is that by the 30s, there was an obvious need for systemic actions with regard to car safety. So, we have an internal combustion engine, some kind of cart to which this internal combustion engine is bolted. A complete lack of understanding of what is happening, and a very large scope for imagination, I must think. Pedestrians and cyclists were most often knocked down to death because there was no separation of the flow. Everyone went wherever they wanted. Cyclists, by the way, were hated already at the beginning of the 20th century. Here's some funny dude from the cycling community, like, well, we don't just want to ride our bikes, but not to be smeared in space. Naive cyclists. Steering in cars of the 20s was implemented on the principle of you turn the steering wheel, and then the Lord will figure it out. Well, it was really difficult to drive a car, so a car that flew out from behind a turn into a bunch of some people and cyclists is not uncommon at all. Anyway, first they thought of the bumpers. By the way, check out the official presentation. And 2 things surprise me here. The first is the unbending confidence of the operator and some guy that they will not be shot down and everything will be fine. And if you look from a different angle, you will see a crowd of people there at all. The second, the car crashes into the bump at speed and then drives on quite calmly. Not that it's modern shit and made of foil and plastic. In general, the first step in system road safety has been taken. Bumpers began to be installed on dangerous turns, cliffs, and other places where people died. But this is an action at the level of municipalities and the state. And what did the automakers do? They sold products to experimental subjects. And strictly speaking, automakers were not obliged to do anything. They could just produce cars and not worry about it. But the guys from Chevrolet turned out to be the most inquisitive. They were the first to think, oh guys, what will happen if we smash a car into a wall and see what happens? Why? It's simple. Let's try it. The history of crash tests, in fact, can be counted from 1934th year, when the presentation of the Chrysler Airflow took place at the Milster Proving Ground in Michigan. By the way, the Milford test site is a very cool thing, because it is the very first test site in the world that an automaker has built for himself. It was in 1924. It is now that every automaker has its own testing grounds where they test their cars, and Chevrolet, a pioneer in this. All the other manufacturers just rolled their cars through the streets of the city and ran technical solutions on it, and actually endangered the lives of other people because new technical solutions. These are new technical solutions. Figs knows how it will work. So here's a crash test. The guys came up with nothing. They look, the mountain. Let's accelerate the car from the mountain, and then he will turn the steering wheel sharply from the bottom and see what happens. What about the driver? And somehow the castle will sort out there. And look how cool it is. Airflow turns over several times, remains almost completely unharmed, and the distraught driver is carried away further to test the car. The doors open, everything is in order, the car is fully operational, and it was a success and a triumph over the concept of an open-top car, because in those days, there were still disputes about which was better, a closed body or an open one. Airflow has put everything in its place. A living person inside the car at that time did not hover at all during the tests. Yes, no one. How much do you weigh? Moreover, there were not stuntmen, but real test scientists. The guys were so passionate about their business and wanted to get at least some experience, at least some data, that they absolutely did not worry about fractures, injuries, bruises, and so on. It immediately became clear that the main problem, in addition to the ability to eject from the wheelbarrow, is the steering wheel. An iron experience on an iron stick aimed directly at the driver's chest sounds heartfelt, and it was understandable even with the accuracy of measurements, because in fact, the tester was simply asked, well, what is there? How? He's like, here's the loot. And what did you hit here? About this. That's it. But most importantly, nobody noticed the log in the eye of the testers. Everyone thought that the stronger the wheelbarrow, the better. Look at this. The wheelbarrow is thrown off a cliff. It turns over the roof several times, and then, even the windows open normally. But cool it. Back then, engineers thought it was cool if the car was so durable that it could generally remain unscathed after several coups or some serious collision. Like, if the body is intact, then everything is fine, the car is safe. And it is clear why they thought so. Is this an intuitive conclusion? If you seriously hit cars without dummies or people inside. After all, the cars were seriously beaten without people inside. And the engineers only saw the damage to the body and tried to make sure that they did not exist. Beats, then loves. But the truth of life, in fact, is quite often counterintuitive. And statistics proved that the problem is not in the rigidity of the body, because the statistics of deaths grew, and people continued to buy cars, and with great pleasure, to get hurt on public roads. It was necessary to change the approach. Biomechanics. Sounds cool. If we look at Wikipedia, the following definition of biomechanics will be translated there. Biomechanics is a branch of natural sciences that studies, on the basis of models and methods of mechanics, the mechanical properties of living tissues of individual organs or organisms as a whole, as well as the mechanical phenomena occurring in them. What, in Russian, what happens there with different parts of the body, or with the body as a whole, with a different engine? Oh, that's understandable. So, biomechanics began to think seriously at the beginning of the 20th century. But there was a catch. To understand what exactly happens to a person during a collision, especially in a fatal accident, experimental subjects are needed. And the guys from GEM are already frankly bored of just throwing cars off a cliff. And the main snag with the test subjects was the disposable nature of these test subjects. I don't see any snags. The staff is friendly, the work is interesting, the payment is based on the results. For science, of course, nothing is a pity, but still, I want to leave the staff unchanged after the tests. And I really want to believe that someone is like that after drinking in a bar. Mother. Dig up your grandfather. It sounds terrible, but strictly speaking, what difference does a corpse make? Moreover, there are people who voluntarily bequeath their bodies to science. Voluntarily, and which, accordingly, were picked at in various universities and laboratories there in every way. Such a corpse is called a cadaver in science. As far as I understand, this is the difference between the terms corpse and cadaver. A core is just a useless corpse, and a cadaver is, well, a useful corpse. And again, what do you think? Just like that, there is a death spell in Harry Potter. Is this about a cadavre? Meet Patrick Lawrence, professor of impact biomechanics at Wayne State University in Detroit. Shock biomechanics. This is a subsection of general biomechanics. Your cap is in place, and we owe a lot to this person in understanding the safety of the car. As it was fashionable then, Patrick was not shy at all to leave the experiments to himself. He was constantly trying to find the ultimate strength of his body through various tests. He beat his chest with a pendulum, had fun with a rocket sled, while experiencing very sharp loads during acceleration, and even sharper loads during braking. And naturally, with each test, he collected all possible data and accumulated a huge database. He fell. In the late 30s, he began conducting experiments with scientists on cadavers. The first experiment was uncomplicated. they just threw the corpse into the elevator shaft. You are so noble, you bequeath your body to science, you think that complex experiments will also be put on you, and they just throw you into the elevator. San, how are you? Are you asleep? And after a while, of course, the guys accumulated a lot of information. For example, they found out that the skull without deformation is able to hold a blow of 1.5 tons. It was determined very simply. They just threw cadavers upside down on the steel floor. In the same way, they threw metal blocks on their chests to understand when the bones would break, and other similar tests. Each experiment was carried out, so to speak, to the crunch. But just like that, the data on shock loads and body damage from these loads meant nothing. And Patrick wanted to understand how all this could work in cars. And continued to work. Naturally, scientists began to cooperate with Chevrolet, as these are the guys who were most worried about safety at that moment. Well, you can't say that they were probably steaming, they were just interested. But one way or another, the whole research base, the whole foundation of knowledge, on which our entire understanding of car safety was built later, thanks to Chevrolet. The tests were carried out both with a cadaver inside the car and just with bodies. And all the researchers needed was to collect the maximum possible amount of data on how the body behaves inside the car in a collision, how the body is injured on the steering wheel, on the windows and on other parts of the cabin. Here's what it looked like. The corpse, out of respect for the body, and for moral reasons, was always completely wrapped in cloth. At the same time, initially the condition of the test subject was fully described and documented, and after the test, a second examination took place to identify all organ damage, tissue rupture and fractures. Colleagues, is this an arm, a leg? My respects. But two problems appeared pretty quickly. First, only white people could be used in the trials because Black Lives Matter, who died of natural causes by nonviolent death. And this is immediately a problem, because old people die of natural causes. Not always, and this immediately means that they do not have such strong bones, not such elastic strong tissues, and two identical corpses cannot be found, the error cannot be removed in measurements. Plus, with such experimental subjects, it was impossible to understand what would happen, for example, with a 30-year-old tall man, or with a teenager, for example. The second problem is somehow very operational. The church sniffed out to pass the tests, and was very offended. In the USA, the institution of the church is much stronger than in Russia, so when the church starts protesting against something, it really creates problems. It was enough just a few times for the bishop and the holy fathers to speak, so that the whole public began to be very indignant about it. Everyone grumbled, and said that it was not right to torment the sons of God after death, and that scientists should not cross the line in any case. It was all from the devil, that's all. Scientists have been trying to explain something to people, that it's for your safety. It's for the safety of your children after all. Children? How many children? Do you want to? The guys even got confused and collected statistics that the use of cadavers in research helps to save about 8,500 lives every year. But as you can guess, such concepts as statistics and logic were not particularly interested in believers at that time. Not that they are interested now, but in the 50s in general. Amen. In general, GEM scientists naturally fought with the church, but in fact the church could not interfere much in research, because people still voluntarily bequeathed their bodies to scientists. And she still did not have the right of ownership of the corpse, and all that the church could. This is constantly throwing mud at scientists. But scientists have always been indifferent to such things as image and public perception. Anyway, the church and the limited data that the guys received from the research made them think that new approaches are needed, new methods are needed. We need something alive. Thus, a new research method has appeared. Someone thought that pigs could be put behind the wheel of a car during a crash test. Lyudmila Petrovna, can I talk to you for a second? They took a live pig, put it under anesthesia, and then it served on the ear. After the test, the body was examined in detail for bruises, smudges, fractures, and that's all. And if no serious damage was recorded, then the pig was then nursed and quietly sent to do their pig business there. But as you can guess, there were few such lucky ones. Basically, the pig was attacked by a rather noticeable star. But, even in this case, no one was upset, because after the tests, the whole team of scientists was waiting for a big picnic. And that's why this project was called barbecue. Brilliant naming, I think. And this is not a joke. This is really the name of the project. But immediately, as soon as the general public found out about these tests, another group of anxious people appeared. Animal rights activists. It's like zoophiles, only on the other side. And again, all the arguments of scientists and researchers that they simply cook their dinner in a tricky way were not taken into account. GEM was waiting for huge demonstrations under the slogan General Motors, General Murders. General Type Killer, an organization dedicated to the protection of animal rights in the United States, is called PETA. They staged demonstrations everywhere, drawing public attention to the problem. GEM used animals in his trials for the entire half of the 20th century. But they did not bring serious changes in safety by themselves. The peak of the protests occurred in the 80s, and like any demonstrations, they were not always peaceful. Quite often, activists painted cars with spray paint. And it wasn't always their cars, please note. And of course, not only automakers were concerned, but animals in general are experiencing a lot of things to this day. But for GEM, against the background of a poor financial situation, and already not the best reputation, such protests did not bode well. It was necessary to somehow negotiate and find a compromise. In total, according to estimates of animal rights activists, GEM killed 19,000 animals in his trials, using not only pigs, but also in extremely rare cases, monkeys and dogs. Yes, it's bad. But for some reason, no one remembers the number of hypothetically saved human lives. And the fact that the pig would not have been slaughtered anyway, only without anesthesia and very cruelly, also does not bother anyone. In any case, GEM is a killer. Such logic, by the way, the last time a pig was used in tests in the USA was in the 93rd year, and in China it is still used. Well, real. Now the Chinese are still using it in their tests. They are testing child seats, and basically all sorts of small restraints on them. Apparently, simply because a pig is worth a multiple of a mannequin, and the Chinese have always been indifferent to ethics, and in relation to animals. And the cadaver, by the way, was last used by Ford in the 2011 year, when testing its inflatable seat belts. And Chevrolet Cadavres also stopped using in the mid-90s. These guys came to replace the Cadavres and animals. The family of Hybrid 3 mannequins, which appeared in 1976. Dummies have been tried before, since the 50s, but it was very difficult to collect data from them, since there were no computing equipment and smart sensors yet. The only thing that could be done was to put the camera on and watch where the doll would fly. And Hybrid 3, with the help of sensors, allows you to collect data from each part of the body, understand the loads and the duration of these loads, and from this, we can conclude that and how a potential participant in an accident will break, get up and fight like a man. And most importantly, it became possible to standardize the tests and eliminate the errors that the use of unique test subjects gave. There are mannequins in the form of an adult man, woman, child, and even such a cute chubby. Therefore, in the modern world, scientists and engineers no longer need to walk around cemeteries with a shovel. It's all thanks to these silent guys who get punched in the face every day for the benefit of motorists. But you and I remember these statistics of deaths on the roads in the United States, and we can notice that the situation did not improve. And over time it only got worse. And despite all the tests of scientists from Wayne State University, despite all the tests inside Chevrolet, everything that the company came to in the 50s, that the car could not be safe in principle. The loads are too high, and the human body, on the contrary, is too fragile. And this is the official Chevrolet report on car safety research of the 50th year. In the 60s, the problem becomes global. Specifically, in the USA, there is generally an adoption. During the 60s, 456,000 people died on the roads, and during the 70s, 507,000 people. If anything, for the entire period of the Second World War, the United States, according to official data, suffered losses of 418,000 human lives. And we are not counting the wounded, disabled people, both in the war and on the roads, in the sense of not counting disabled people. Come on. Oh, that's another one. And in fact, people in the 50s and 60s in the States, going out on public roads every day, as if they were going to the front. But the automotive industry exists not only in the USA, and not only people in the USA sat and thought about how to make the roads safe. So let's take a look at Europe. There is such a place, the Automobile Hall of Fame. In fact, this is a museum, but getting into the Automotive Hall of Fame is considered the highest achievement for anyone who is somehow engaged in the automotive industry. And in the previous Burr stories, you and I have already met several members of this party. Ferdinand Porsche, the star of the automotive world, and we talked about him in the video about Volkswagen. Louis Chevrolet, Walter Chrysler, brother's daughter, Henry Ford II, Leah Coca, Ward Packard. These are the heroes of our issue about Detroit. And of course, Kichira Toyota and Sator Honda, the main characters of the Japanese automotive industry. All these people were honored to be in the Hall of Automotive Fame, and there is a legend about each of them. And it's time to get acquainted with another party member. Meet Bella Arena. My father, German engineer-inventor. Quite often he is compared to Thomas Edison, the greatest inventor of all mankind. Let me remind you that Thomas Edison had 1,093 patents, and Bella had 2,500 of them. Borja was a genius, turned on his job. Already at the age of 17, he invented a prototype of a trauma-safe mechanism. The prototype itself was not viable, but this engineer's passion for car safety is obvious. He fervently believed that a safe car could be made. And in fact, this one person changed everything. This character becomes interesting to us in 1937 year when he brings to mind his theory about a three-section car, in which there is, as it were, a capsule in the middle, rigid, not deformable, in which passengers sit, and two crumpled zones that take on the impact energy. At this angle, no one looked at the car before the fight. And he, in turn, went to various interviews with various automakers to be heard. But automakers didn't need such jokes. Besides, they thought he was crazy, because, well, I mean, how is that? Will our cars be soft? What? Who will buy them? But Varenik, of course, did not listen to them. The only thing he wanted was to realize his ideal, and as it seemed to him, Mercedes would be the most successful manufacturer for this. For 2 years, from the 37th to the 39th, Bella beat Mercedes' doorsteps, until one of his former colleagues at his previous job arranged for him to meet with Wilhelm Haspel, a man from Mercedes head management. Varenik stumbled into the interview, and foaming at the mouth, began to explain to Wilhelm that the cars of the future would have completely different axles, a different body, a different frame, a different steering. And not only will they be more powerful and more economical, they will be much safer. Beautiful cars of the future. The tea is getting cold there. Wilhelm looked at him and thought, what an interesting psycho. I'll hire him. Belly was given a laboratory in Windelfingel, but he did not have enough time. If you suddenly forgot, then the 40s of the 20th century were remembered by humanity with a very massive flash mob on cutting themselves out, as a result of which Germany felt very bad. Yes, we actually had a bomb party here. Flash mob. Generally a bomb. Bella was fired from his job, but not because there was something wrong with him, but because the whole of Germany as a whole was forbidden to design and construct anything until the 48th year. Until the restrictions eased, Bella worked as a janitor, but in the evenings, he continued designing. And by the 48th year, he returns to Mercedes with 2 prototypes. And 2 years later, in the 51st year, Bella receives the main patent of her life. Patent number 854-157. The technology of creating a car with a durable passenger capsule and 2 zones for deformation, absorbing the impact of a collision. The main difference between Bella's angle of view from the rest was the kinetic energy in the collision. He understood that something had to accept these forces. And if the car does not accept it, then human bodies inside the car will accept it. All his inventions were based on this. All possible kinetic energy of the impact should be taken over by the car body. And if the body is deformable enough, then only the echoes of the impact will reach the salon with living people, and this innovation will save human lives. This patent was obtained just at the time when Chevrolet made a statement that the car could not be safe, and they could not cope with it. After the first crash tests, it became obvious how right Bella was. Just look at it. How mannequins behave in a car with a rigid body, and how mannequins behave in exactly the same conditions with a body that takes a blow. Even without measuring equipment, everything becomes clear. And the first production Mercedes car that was built using this technology was the W111, the safest car in the world at that time. Pre-production tests immediately showed how far Chevrolet was from the truth, weighing down and strengthening their cars. And of course, Bella didn't stop at the body. His vision was that not only the body of the car should be safe, but in general, the whole car in principle. Bella's next task was to design a completely injury-free salon. All the switch handles, holders, torpedo, steering wheel, everything went under recycling. Even if the lever itself was iron and could cause injury, it was a matter for him to mount such that it broke at the first serious load. All these are your modern ones. Oh, what a soft plastic. Look at what a nice rubber thing it is. In fact, not because marketers explain to you that this is a premium interior trim, but so that you are not killed by just anything in the car interior. And in fact, absolutely all soft finishing materials, safe handlebars, safe torpedoes, safe handles are all Bella Barney's legacy. Head restraints, also the development of the master. Do you think that they are there so that you can comfortably put your head on a long journey? No, the headrest is needed so that you stay with your neck after an accident. Here's a look at how a mannequin's head behaves without a headrest, and how it behaves with a headrest. In one of the cases, cervical vertebrae will not be observed in a person. Guess which one? Have you seen such cross beams on the bottom of the car, which serve to strengthen the bottom during a side impact? Bella came up with it. The powerful middle rack, again protecting the passenger capsule during a coup, is also Bella's development. The folding steering column, which takes energy upon impact, and thousands of other small but very important changes in the design of the car. It's all the merit of one person. All colleagues spoke of him as a very complex person. He was a fanatic. It was very difficult to work with him. He saw nothing and recognized nothing but his own goal, and achieved it absolutely by any means. It never made a difference to him that someone was tired, that someone was burned out, that someone didn't like something. It doesn't matter. The most important thing, complete the task. And he was the best. And also, thanks to this man Mercedes. It's a Mercedes. In addition to his achievements in security, Barony is also the author of one of the projects of 1926, which he created together with the legendary Hans Lidvinka before Bella came to Mercedes. The project of a car with a spatial frame and a rear-mounted motor, revolutionary in its time. But Ferdinand Porsche implemented it and called it Volkswagen Käfer, aka Volkswagen Beetle. Yes, Porsche stole the idea from Lidvinka and Bella, based on their original sketches, and the court in 1954 recognizes the authorship of the original Beetle for Bella. If you want to learn more about this, check out our issue of Burr Stories about Volkswagen. Technically, Bella Barr retired in 1971, but he continued to work from home together with Mercedes for the benefit of saving human lives. In 1994, Bella was inducted into the Automotive Hall of Fame as the most outstanding and successful engineer-inventor in the field of automotive safety. And 3 years later, at the age of 90, Bella will die. There is actually quite a bit of information about Bella, and it is understandable, since he did not make some brilliant engine, did not design a sports car that the whole world admired, did not create a car maker that people would love. He was doing an imperceptible job. But, thanks to this man, thanks to his labors, millions of people who got into serious accidents and survived thanks to his developments can continue to enjoy life, raise their children, and drive cars. And this man does not take his place in the Hall of Automotive Fame for nothing. And I, as a car fan, bow my head and send my confession from the bottom of my heart to this person. A man who cared. A man who laid down his life so that other people would continue to live. Did you notice anything strange in most of the crash tests that we showed you? The mannequins are not fastened. And why? You asked. But because there was nothing. The trials of the 30s Chevrolet, Wayne State University research, trauma, a safe interior and crumpled body parts, are all good, of course, but all this together does not matter in the slightest. If the body inside the car is flying at a speed of 60 to 70 kilometers per hour towards its fate. Yes, in the 50s, in some crash tests, dummies were fastened there with something, the first prototypes of seat belts. But in fact, it didn't matter at all, because in real life no one was fastened. The production cars stupidly had no seat belts. And it's not just that there weren't any. The first seat belt, in fact, was invented in 1885 by Edward Clachan. Of course, it is difficult to call it a seat belt, since this thing was intended to fix the coachman of the carriage. Well, it's just that quite often the carriage fell into some pit. The coachman was thrown, he lost the reins, the horse poked a pile from the carriage. Inconvenient. In 1903, a certain Gustave Desirated him, patented his first car staples. Then there were several prototypes used in aviation. For example, in the 13th year, Adolphe Pigou fastened himself when he performed a dead loop, but it all made no sense. No one was going to use them, because it was frankly inconvenient. Automakers did not put this matter in their cars, and in general, it is somehow not boyish not to be tied to the saddle. And if you wanted to, then, of course, you could screw yourself something inside the car. And some piece automakers had safety belts available as an option, but according to statistics, less than 1% of users bought it. 1% shit. The first production car, which necessarily had seat belts in the base as standard, appeared only in 1959 year. Homemade and small-scale cars by Type and Firma Torpedo are not considered. And this is the moment when Volvo proudly enters the stage with a pension certificate. This person allowed the Volvo brand to create the most significant element of security. Nils is sick. Another guy from the Car Hall of Fame hang out. At the age of 22, in the 42nd year, Nils came to SAP, which at that time was still engaged in aviation. It had not yet reached the car, and he was designing ejection seats there, including seat belts for these seats. And this is exactly the case where you can't do without a belt. You just can't hold on to the chair any tighter. There are no straps, but you hold on. In the 58th year, he moves to Volvo, and the main task before him is to design a seat belt in such a way that it is convenient and efficient to use. And in the 59th year, this Volvo PV444 car appears, and the US patent 3043625, which described the design of a three-point seat belt, one of the most significant patents of the 20th century. And it's not my nasty opinion I'm inserting here, but really, this patent is considered one of the most significant inventions of the entire 20th century. Figs understand how it was calculated, but, by the turn of the millennium, the seatbelt helped save 1 million lives, and continues to fight for you to continue living after an accident. And the patent itself would mean nothing, but Volvo made it mandatory to install seatbelts in all its cars, starting in 1959 year, and thereby set the standard in the industry. And after that, they made this patent publicly available to all other automakers so that everyone could install this design in their car, completely calmly, and for free. And I think that all people who can believe in intelligence and common sense, in all these unpopular things, do not need to prove that the belt is effective and saves lives. But just in case, I put a couple of facts. Let's take statistics on real accidents. About 70% of people who survived critical accidents survived thanks to the belt. For everyone's favorite airbags, this figure is only 19%. That's because the belt is primary. If it is not used, absolutely all passive security mechanisms are useless. And moreover, it is not enough to fasten yourself. For your own safety, it is critically important that everyone in the car is strapped in. Here let's take a look at the crash test. 2 passengers are strapped in, 2 are not. Collisions dummies flew. At this moment, the front dummy is guaranteed to break the knees, and most likely, the hip bones, since they experience a load above a ton. After a fraction of a second, the front passenger begins to drive his face through the windshield. Have you heard such an argument? Yes, I'd rather fly through the windshield and stay alive. You are very unlikely to knock out modern windshields with your head. Go try it. You can knock them out with an axe. Look at how severely the mannequin cuts the face on the shards. At this moment, when the glass cracks, the skin on the mannequin's face is cut with cuts up to 1.5 centimeters deep. Simply put, this dude remains without skin on his face. In addition, the neck breaks back against the glass, leaving dust from the cervical vertebrae. Then the chest. Her ass, ribs, and all internal organs are being taken over by a torpedo at full speed. Soft-boiled ribs, organs too. And at this moment, a friend from behind arrives in time. Not only does he finish off the passenger sitting in front with the back of the chair, he breaks his knees on the same chair, and prescribes with all the dope, from the head to the chest of the person sitting in front, breaking his neck and finishing off the chest of the neighbor. The mannequin strapped in from behind can only throw up his hands and shout, "Well, ept. Valera, what are you doing? You are Vitalik and Wool." Or here, for example, AIIHS is having fun. Who they are, I will tell you further. Here is the same Vitalik and Valera engaged in group suicide. Vitalik in front is quite sad from such a sandwich. More precisely, he is not sad. He's dead. And the joke is that it's only 50 kilometers per hour. At a higher speed, it's a stupid pity to beat dummies. And if two cars collide head-on, at the standard city speed of 50 kilometers per hour for both of them, and at least someone is not wearing a seat belt in the cabin, then you are very likely. And if at least one of you tries to give me an argument in the comments that but my friend flew out and everything is fine with him, then go and study the term called survivor's mistake. With this, however, there is a problem that you will have to read and think there, and it is contraindicated for you with such an argumentative base. Fuck knows how your psyche will perceive knowledge, so at your own risk, guys. The third fact, with a sharp rollover and flip, a fastened seat belt reduces the risk of death by 5 times. Where are you going to fly out here, my dear? With a sharp rollover of the car on the roof, the probability of breaking the neck and the ceiling is almost 100%. The neck is this food receiver holder. Well, if you break it, you won't be able to push food through. You'll die of hunger. Well, back to the Volvo. In general, the focal safety of this brand has always existed. On the previous generation PV444, before the advent of seatbelts, a special laminated windshield was used, which did not break into pieces and had no chance to cut people. One of the first in the Volvo industry came up with a bumper as a safety element. But again, the most important merit of Volvo. This is the invention of the 3-point seat belt. And from that moment on, the focus on safety at Volvo is only getting stronger because the whole world has a phrase hanging on its ears, that Volvo is about security. Volvo came up with all the advanced solutions in the 50s and 60s, almost simultaneously with Mercedes. Sometimes Bella was the first, sometimes Volvo, but the most important thing is that now, in the 2020th year, Volvo's leadership in safety is indisputable. Today, if an accident involving a Volvo car occurs on the territory of Sweden, then Volvo specialists go to the scene of the accident. Together with emergency services, they take all the data from the car, analyze the place of the accident, the conditions under which this accident became possible, and think about how to make it so that it does not happen again here. The approach is royal. The team that goes to the scene of an accident is called Volvo Expert Research Team and has been around for 50 years, and every day they go on the road. But the royal approach is not only in this. Somehow the Volvo guys thought that the tests of Euro NCAP and the like, it's all for Pusick. We will build our laboratory with blackjack and pensioners. And built. This is their personal security lab. Only Volvo has that. In their laboratory, a piece of the building in which the acceleration mechanism is located travels back and forth on rails, so that absolutely any situation can be simulated. Guess you didn't hear wrong. A piece of the building crawls back and forth across the territory to make cars more fun to break. And naturally, you won't surprise anyone in a Volvo with ordinary crash tests into a barrier or a wheelbarrow into a wheelbarrow. That's whether it's a matter of throwing a wheelbarrow off a bridge, turning it over several times, through the roof, driving it into a pole, or into a rock. No, oh, well really, is there a rock here, just standing around doing nothing? This is a one-of-a-kind center, and its maintenance costs fabulous money. But Volvo spends them with the only motivation to make cars safer. In the modern world of Volvo, the only brand that has set itself the task that after 2020th year, Not a single person will die in a Volvo car. Yes, everyone seems to be talking about what we are, about security, that's all. But Volvo has set a goal and puts everything for its implementation. For example, recently they forcibly limited the maximum acceleration speed to 180 kilometers per hour on all their cars, when all automakers are chasing the maximum possible speed. The maximum possible acceleration indicators of a Volvo like this, and we generally have above 180. On which roads in the world can you drive? On a couple of autobahns in Germany, and on one road in the Ilk. We limit everyone, because there are 3 Volvo cars a year, and safety is more important to everyone else. And in general, why would we be complicit in the possibility of violating traffic rules? Especially if we want our Volvo customer to always survive, even if he very much wants to kill himself in his car, so that he never succeeds. Hey, live. But now it's 2020, and the implementation of the Vision 2020 program has not happened. The guys have postponed the deadline, but I have no doubt that the first brand in which people will stop dying on public roads will be Volvo. But back to the story. What do you think was the main problem with the seatbelt? Maybe the problem was in automakers who did not want to install an additional element on their cars so as not to complicate the design, so as not to increase the cost of production, that's all. Or maybe the problem was in the imperfect design of the belt itself. Maybe he wasn't protecting properly. No. The main problem with seat belts, created just to save people's lives, was the people themselves. People didn't understand why they needed these inconvenient things. Ugh, that's disgusting. It's uncomfortable to feel tied to a seat. No way. The engineers were screaming hysterically at the same time. Yes, the exhaust is in our mouth. We've come up with everything for you. I held my hand once, and everything is fastened, safe, convenient, well. To which people answered quite calmly. Do you see this redness here? Here, right here. See? No? It is there, I feel it. Fuck you and your seat belts. The morgue will take that into account. So yes, it's inconvenient. That's the kind of argument people had in the 50s. And unfortunately, it has not changed much in 70 years. And yes, it's not enough to come up with something technical that can work in people's favor. To convey the benefits of the invention to people, quite a task. But sometimes there are events in life that push the moment forward, and these events happen not only thanks to the engineer. So, what do we have with you? At the moment we are in the area of the 60s. Us automakers are confident that they are doing everything right, and some European automakers are really doing everything right. At the same time, automobile safety tests are carried out as anyone wants, and people continue to go out on public roads, as if to the front, and as it usually happens when the situation is heated, when electricity is felt in the air. One spark is enough for everything to start changing. The chain reaction was started by this man, Ralph Naden. Oddly enough, he is not an engineer, not a scientist, not an inventor. He is a lawyer, journalist, and political activist. Ralph is quite a controversial personality, but that's why we're interested in him. In 1965, he publishes the book Dangerous at Any Speed, in which, with all his talent, criticism falls on Chevrolet and on the state, showing how dangerous cars, roads are, how much manufacturers do not steam, in his opinion. The book consists of 8 chapters, in each of which he examines one specific problem. The first and most sensational chapter was about the Chevrolet Cadavres. Remember, you and I have already dispersed about this car in our Burr stories dedicated to Detroit. Let me remind you, it was a retaliatory blow from Chevrolet by the European manufacturer with these small compact rear-engined cars. And in our issue, I made fun of him that he turned over at any turn. But Ralph wasn't fucking around. He watered the engineer in the Chevrolet as best he could. He was convinced that the propensity of the car to flip. This is almost intentional negligence of the automaker. But, as in any other radical work, the author is quite often far from the truth. Yes, the fact that the Cadavres was prone to skidding and oversteer, but in fact, it was due to the rear engine layout of the car. Look at the owners of 911th Porsches, they have it cleaned up in their eyes for a reason. The rear suspension was really imperfect. Tourist Cadavres had swinging semi-axles at the rear, without a stabilizer bar. Swinging axles. This is relatively speaking. You have a hinge in the middle of the suspension, relative to which two axes go back and forth. So the design is not original. It has been used in many places before, but since the automaker wanted to achieve comfort, the suspension had a very large stroke, and coupled with the large mass of the car, when you pass a turn at high speed, it can really throw you problems. The inner wheel begins to relax relative to the turn, and, thanks to the lever, the lifting force appears. At the same time, the outer wheel begins to rest against the turn and brake in the hinge, and if at this moment you sharply put on the brakes, you are almost guaranteed to turn over. And a very large percentage of accidents with cars was primarily due to the fact that Americans simply stupidly did not know how to drive a rear-engine layout. Small rear-engine cars did not have such a problem because they had small motors and very low mass. They just couldn't accelerate, and even if they accelerate there, figs with it, at least somewhere in the turn, they didn't have so much inertia to turn over. But Rawls believed that only automakers were to blame for these things. He believed that a car should be bought by a person who does not understand anything about them, and calmly use it without risking his own life. And he was right about that. The following chapters of his work consistently carried the design of the car interior, and in particular, a bunch of chrome which on a sunny day could blind the driver, traumatic parts of the interior, and most importantly, the priorities of the state with regard to road safety. In the year of the book's release, he somehow calculated that the state had spent $320 million on road decoration and only $500,000 on security. The main cupcake is that Ralph, by his own admission, has never been behind the wheel before. Typical experts, but it was not important because his work did the most important thing. It attracted public attention and caused a huge resonance in society. Special attention should be paid to Chevrolet's reaction to all this movement. It is clear that they were the most outraged of the automakers, since most of the manure flew into their garden. But instead of refuting this material somehow, what could be done once or twice, because, well, there was enough technical nonsense there, because the person still understood cars purely speculatively. Chevrolet. They hired private detectives, started tapping his phone to find all his secrets. You never know what's interesting there. And then, they started sending paid prostitutes to catch him with them, and thereby compromise him. Like, they probably counted on the fact that Ralph is sitting like this in a bar, a girl sits down with him, they talk for a while, then they go up to his room, and then he jumps out. Yeah. And look, here he fucks women with sex. As if you can do something else with them. No, not only that. Chevrolet ambassadors of intelligence and strategic decisions in the 60s. How, even if it were possible to imagine that Ralph could lead, purely hypothetically, some kind of depraved life, how did this cast doubt on his work? Moreover, Ralph got wind of this case pretty quickly, sued them for interference in their privacy, and sued them for $500,000. A Chevrolet from the 60s, but figs with him, with Chevrolet and with Ralph. The most important thing is that the state has received a huge number of complaints and lawsuits from injured people on the roads. The state, in turn, reacted with lightning speed by its standards. The very next year, the 36th President Lyndon B. Johnson signed 2 laws. The first established state safety standards, and the second allocated funds to local authorities for the implementation of road safety projects. And 4 years later, in 1970, the bureau that was entrusted with the implementation and control of these 2 laws was renamed RTISE, the National Bureau of Road Safety in the United States. And since everything in the USA should have its own system of checks and balances, almost immediately a non-profit organization is founded. An organization that is designed to do the same thing as RTISE. It is just founded and sponsored by automobile insurance companies. This tandem is an example and standard for the whole world to this day. HC2 conducts more evil tests, and therefore, always dig up to ours. And RTISE, in turn, is also constantly digging up guys. And it is in these disputes that the truth is born, and they know it. They know that the more meticulously and scrupulously they look for mistakes and miscalculations in each other's work, the safer the roads will become every day. Okay. In fairness, it should be said that one of the first things that our Taizé did was the road test of the unfortunate Chevrolet Corvair. They drove the car around the track in various weather conditions and at all possible speeds, and compared it with other popular cars of the time, Ford Falcon, Plymouth Vallon and Volkswagen Beetle, to understand the validity of the claims that Ralph put forward to this car. And here is their official conclusion: the Corvair of the 1960 of the 63rd years successfully withstands comparison with the cars used in the tests that are modern to it. The controllability and stability of the 63rd-year-old Corvair does not cause an immorally high propensity for unexpected loss of controllability or overturning, and is at least no worse than some of the cars modern to it, both foreign and domestic. But no one paid attention to these conclusions anymore. Corvair's reputation was forever buried. And the most important thing has already happened. Car safety became a mandatory and compulsory requirement for automakers. And control over the fulfillment of these conditions fell on the shoulders of the state in the person of and non-profit. C, with the advent of and car safety, become a conveyor belt. The guys, having received funding, took up the matter with full seriousness. Here are some of the first head-on crash tests, according to which it is clear that there is a lot of work to be done, and an accident occurs in very different situations. Motorists have no imagination for various self-sawing methods. Therefore, organizations also began to systematize various tests of speed, distance, measurements, methodology, temperature, completeness of the car. Everything went under the regulations. It was thanks to the controlling organizations that it became possible to oblige automakers to participate in the tests without fail. And our Taizé and IIHC are not controlled by automakers, which is very important. If someone has made a dangerous pepelac, then they will not turn a blind eye to it. They will simply not allow it on the road. And the test is getting tougher every year. In the year 2012, IIHC conducted a scandalous series of voluntary crash tests. With a 25% overlap, 40% crash test is already passed by all automakers without problems. And the guys are like, come on, let's fight in a different way. And they got stuck. This type of crash test simulates a glancing blow head-on, extremely difficult for a car. And those cars that passed 40% perfectly failed the tests with a bang. 200 cars participated in the test, and only 11 of them passed the test perfectly. More than half of the cars could not protect passengers in principle. Toyota's leader in standard tests, the Corolla, was rated critically, and the Camry, Prius, and RAV4 were considered dangerous. Today, 25% overlap is already a standard test, but not yet mandatory. It's just a matter of time, but it seems to me that in 10 to 15 years, about 2 cycles of car development, manufacturers will learn how to make cars that will easily pass this test, and it will already be mandatory. Which for us, for motorists, is of course extremely positive news. Today, there are a number of organizations in the world that deal with road safety. By ear, JUCAP, ADAC, JACOB, NAMI, RCAP, WELL, and many others. All of them, one way or another, are created in the image and likeness of ASHTI and AIA. It is they who have the strictest tests. It is they who have the strictest standards. And it is thanks to this tandem and these two organizations that the deadly war of people with the laws of physics on public roads has moved forward. Of course, the topic of road safety is not limited only to what I told you about today. Of course, a separate world. This is the device of modern roads, a system of lighting, markings, signs, that's all. A separate story is the device of the modern urban and automotive environment. The legislative framework, tracking systems, individual departments involved in the control of transport and automobile traffic. All this is not enough for me to tell my life. But I am a motorist, and first of all I am interested in cars. And here's the question: would I be able to explain to you all the difference between modern cars and cars of the past in terms of safety in 72 seconds instead of an hour-long video? And the answer is yes. I could. Exactly 72 seconds. There is a report video of AIHS, where they conducted a crash test in honor of their 50th anniversary in 2009 year. They pushed two cars at a speed of 60 kilometers per hour head-on with a 40% overlap. Chevrolet Bel 1959th year of manufacture, the year of the foundation of the IGTVM, and Chevrolet Malibu, 2009th year of release, the average American modern car. Enjoy it. If a man were sitting in the place of a mannequin in the blower, he would have no chance of surviving. None. In general, the loads were off the scale. If a man were sitting in the place of a mannequin in Malibu, nothing would prevent him from getting out of the car, because he would only have a couple of bruises, and all that would have been waiting for him after the accident was a slight feeling of shock, and then a showdown with the insurance company, and receiving a payment. In fact, it looks creepy and amazing at the same time. It seems to me that this is a spectacle that makes no sense to comment on. But let's get back to where I started. To the numbers, but not to the American, but to the Russian. If you had the idea at least once during the video that this is all good, of course, but here in Russia, everything is terrible on the roads. Nobody gives a shit and nobody needs anything. Fortunately, you are wrong. In the 2019 year, 16,900 people died on public roads in Russia, and 164,000 accidents occurred. Is it a lot or a little? Of course, in itself, the figure of almost 17,000 dead is terrible. Fact. But any numbers need to be looked at in dynamics, and that's what we'll see if we look a little closer. To begin with, let's look at the fleet. In the 2000th year, there were 20 million cars in the Russian Federation. In the 2020th, 58 million cars, almost 3 times more. At the same time, in the 2000th year, an official 157,000 road accidents were registered, and in the 2019, 164,000. And at the same time, I very much doubt the figure of 157,000 2000th year, because who is older? Here we remember that then accidents were registered much less often than now. It's now you have fairy tales, TP, that's all, and you register any scratch. And before the traffic cops were called, only if they were either seriously shaken up or could not agree. And it turns out that the number of accidents we have is about the same, but the fleet has tripled. In fact, your probability of getting into an accident has tripled in 20 years. And at the same time, the death rate on the roads in the 2000th year was almost 30,000 people, and the peak was in the 2003 with 35,000 dead. Now we see the figure of 16,900 and understand that, in the 2000th year, every 5th accident ended in a fatal outcome. Now almost every 10th. Well, 9 and 7, to be precise. And it turns out that the probability of getting into an accident has decreased by 3 times, to die in this accident has decreased by 2 times. And if we multiply one by the other, we get that your probability of dying in an accident is now 6 times lower in Russia than 20 years ago. Of course, we as humanity still have a lot of work to do on road safety. Of course, the car is dangerous. Of course, you need to treat the management of the car consciously. But anyway, this is the part of the video in which I send my inner great gratitude to all employees of the Traffic Police, Ministry of Transport, road builders, fence builders, illuminator, architect, design engineer. Absolutely all people who are somehow connected with roads and with safety on them. even those who do the camera. And attentive viewers of my channel, remember that I quite often say such a phrase, that by inserting a plug into the seatbelt socket, you devalue thousands of lives of engineers and scientists who laid down their lives for your safety. You devalue all the automakers, all the landfills, all the tons of metals that cars turn into at these testing grounds. You devalue the hard and routine work of a huge number of people who are only busy making sure that you return home safe and sound tonight. Approximately this is the data array I mean when I say this phrase. And no one supported us, no one sponsored us. We ourselves. With a pure heart, because we care. But I promised you at the beginning of the video to do without moralizing and complicated soup. Therefore, I want to end this video with a slightly different thought. The story is such a funny thing. It's always interesting to look back and watch how people invented what seems commonplace today. But in fact, I didn't want to talk to you today about how people smashed cars with corpses, animals, and rubber dolls inside. All the previous material was needed only to immerse you in the topic. And now I'm going to ask you to forget all this. And I'll also ask you to take your mind off the phone if you suddenly got into Instagram, from food and from everything else. Let's be alone with you now. Look at me. I want to tell you something very important. And my last request. Let's close our eyes together. I know that some of you are villainizing and just looking at the black screen, but we will intentionally not show anything further. Let's be honest. I'm not just asking. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And exhale. Be with yourself for a few seconds. Feel yourself. And now remember your mom's eyes. Remember how she looks at you when you're about to go on some trip. Remember how you hug. How you hold her to you, how warm she feels. And now remember your father's eyes. Remember the feeling in your hand from the handshake. Remember how you and him hug and pat each other on the back. It's always amazing how different these hugs are. Gentle with mom, and strong with dad. Remember these sensations at the level of your body. And now remember the eyes of your closest person in life. It doesn't matter who it is. It is important that he is the most expensive for you. Remember how you laugh with him and enjoy this life. Remember the last time you hugged. And after all, this person also has a special feeling. They are their own, unique. And it's always amazing how lucky you two are to have each other in your lives. If there are, then remember the eyes of your children. Remember how you feel when they look at you. What happens in your body when you hug? And what feelings happen inside you when you see how they grow, how they take their first steps? How they get to know this world. Now get them all together. To make them look at you. It's like you're standing in front of them all, and you're looking at each other. Feel it. Man is a very selfish being. It is very difficult for us to realize but it is impossible to understand what it is like to die. And what a monstrous hole and grief this event will leave in the hearts of loved ones and relatives. So imagine once again all the people dear to you, the way they look at you, and how you look at them. And imagine that they all disappear. In 1 second. In an instant. They don't have you, they have you. All these people, all their warmth and their eyes will disappear in an instant. Imagine this abyss. Imagine this emptiness. It is a black and irrevocably lonely space. And here's my question to you. What would you give if they told you that they could all be returned? Do they, all these dear people, deserve for you one automatic movement of the hand to buckle up? Is this banal habit worth all the warmth and all the love of your life? I think you and I know the answer. The only problem is that if you fall into this abyss, it will be too late to buckle up. It has only an entrance. And there is no way out. Stay with it. And forgive me for my selfishness, but in fact, this whole video, all this hour-long material, was made for the sake of one phrase. Dad, buckle up. Even if you drive very slowly around a small city in a big, early SUV. And you, my viewer, as promised, I will leave with your choice. All I wanted to achieve was to connect the image of the eyes and warmth of all your loved ones with one automatic movement of the hand, which must be performed every time, as a ritual, when you get into a vehicle. Even in the back.